This happened to me while I was on my way home one night. I was living in an apartment at the time. When I arrived on the first floor of my building, there was a piece of paper hanging on the wall that said that the elevator was out of service. No, not again, I said to myself. I lived on a pretty high floor, so without any other choice, I had to walk up the stairs. I was walking up the stairs out of sheer desperation, and all of a sudden, I heard something. Then I began to feel uneasy. I knew that crimes often occurred around my neighborhood, especially targeting people who were alone. When I listened closely, I could hear a pair of men's shoes and a pair of women's high heels walking at the same time. I assumed that it was a couple. You guys are having a hard time like me. I'm struggling to walk up the stairs, especially this late at night, I thought to myself. I sighed with relief and turned my head around. However, I will never forget what I saw at that moment. There was a man who was crawling with a pair of men's shoes on his feet and a pair of high heels on his hands. He was crawling.
This happened when I was a kid. I was in the 5th grade and my friend, let's call him Ethan, invited me over to his place. He lived right by the ocean, and if you walked through the forest for half a mile, you'd reach a nice beach with a diving board. When I got to his house, we hung out, played video games, and talked. You know, typical kid stuff. Then we decided to go to the beach. It wasn't too far away and we knew we could get back in time for dinner, so we set off. To make the trip more adventurous, we decided to bushwhack our own path. After walking a couple of minutes, we hit a tall fence. "Crap," Ethan exclaimed. "Well, I guess we'll have to go back." Suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I spotted something. The fence went about 8 meters long and then stopped. My jaw dropped. There was a house. It was an old cabin with boarded-up windows. The planks were falling off, and you could see the old insulation underneath. It was gray in color and had flecks of blue paint. The fence led up to the side of the house, stopped, and then continued on the other side. What scared me the most was that there was no road. I mean, not even a clearing to get to the road. You'd have to walk 20 minutes. "Kevin, come on!" Ethan yelled from behind me. "Look at this!" I shouted back. Ethan walked up to me, and his jaw dropped. There was no door, just a frame, and peering through the frame, we could see that there was a back door, also with no frame. All we had to do was walk through the house, then we could get to the beach. I looked at Ethan. "Should we do it?" I asked him. He shrugged. "I don't see why not," he responded. Inside the house was dark, despite the sunlight pouring in through the door. We advanced slowly through the house, and Ethan pointed to the door. As we reached the door, I peered up the stairs. I grabbed Ethan and shoved him out the door. "What was it?" he said as soon as we got away. My whole body shook. I must be going mad, I thought to myself. Eventually, I explained it to him. As we reached the door, I wanted to take one last look at the house. I glanced up the stairs and I saw the shadowy outline of a person. All I could see were eyes staring back at me and a crooked grin. Ethan and I took another route back home, and we told Ethan's mom. She laughed at us and said she'd been that way many times and there was no house. And we were angry because she didn't believe us, so we got out our cameras and went back the next day. When we got there was no house. It was just gone. No clearing, nothing. To this day, Ethan and I still wonder what it was. Was that man just a homeless person, or maybe he was something much, much worse? I suggested to Ethan a theory that scares me to this day. I had been reading about Russian folklore, and a page caught my attention. It was a story about a witch named Baba Yaga who had a moving house. She would eat naughty children, and parents used to use it to scare children. Was this a witch? I guess we'll never know for sure.
With all this quarantining madness going on because of COVID-19, my family and I have fled New York State to our Massachusetts lake house to avoid contact with other people. The lake, which I will not name for safety reasons, has a bunch of houses surrounding it, and in the summer months it's full of boats and people barbecuing and drinking. But right now in late March when I'm writing this, it's kind of a ghost town here, and it's weird seeing it like this here. Anyway, I wouldn't be here writing this if something didn't go wrong, right? My younger brothers, who I'll call Steve and Glenn, were out on the deck overlooking the lake with me. We were setting up the table for a game of beer pong, which we invited our dad to play with us so the teams would be even. The sky had reached that point after sunset where most of the sky was dark, but there was still that hint of orange on the horizon. The lake was calm and quiet, not a single boat, and all the neighboring houses seemed to be vacant. We're truly the only ones around still. Our deck has a fire pit, so we lit that for extra light as well as heat because it was chilly. The four of us were playing a game of beer pong, when in the middle of it, Glenn grabbed his phone and lowered the music to his portable speaker. He and Steve turned around to look over the deck to the grass below. My dad and I went over to see what they were looking at. Glenn said he heard something below us, and he could see someone walk under the deck. The deck doesn't have a stairway leading down. You have to go inside and downstairs to get down there. So my dad and I went downstairs and out the back door under the deck. There was nobody there. My dad called out a bunch of times to confirm this, and we went back upstairs. The thing is, Steve swore by it as well that he also heard someone speaking from under the deck. Regardless, we cut the game of beer pong short and went inside, making sure to lock the door. My mom and dad were up in their loft bedroom, while I was in the living room playing PlayStation. That's when it started. Loud, aggressive bangs on the sliding door. Accompanied with the bangs was a man's shrieks and screams. Sounded like he was screaming for help. The curtain to the door was shut, so I couldn't see who it was, but apparently everyone in the house heard it, because my brothers and parents came rushing to the living room. My dad yanked the curtain open to find himself face to face with some red-in-the-face man banging his fist on the glass, begging to be let in. He was claiming he was hurt and needed help. My dad asked, "Where are you hurt?" He didn't answer that though. He just kept repeating, "Let me in, I'm hurt." My dad then yelled to get out of here before we'd call the cops. He yanked the blinds shut and told us all to shut and lock our windows if they were open. We all stayed in the living room together for a couple hours, just to be safe. We had a movie on in the background as we talked, but eventually, with no other uninvited visitors outside, we all split off into our respective rooms for the night. I was browsing YouTube videos in my bed when it happened. The crash of shattering glass so loud it made me jump out of my bed. My heart instantly started racing. I didn't know if I was the only one who heard it because I didn't hear my parents or brothers running out of their rooms. I picked up the phone and called my dad's cell. He picked up and whispered he heard it too, and to stay in my room and lock the door. I reminded him my door didn't have a lock. Of course, my room, while the biggest of my brothers, was the one room that didn't have a lock. He told me to hide in the closet and call my brothers while he called the cops. I heard footsteps outside my room in the living room area. I tiptoed to my closet and did my best to quietly open and close the door, but the damn hinges just had to squeak. I sat behind a big plastic bag and texted my brothers, who also heard the noise and each locked their doors. It was the most tense moment of my life in that closet. The bedroom door opened, and I could see through the strips in the closet door someone walk to my bed and sit at the edge of it. He then took off one of his shoes and started shaking it, as if to get something out of his shoe. He put his shoe back on, then his head actually turned to look at the closet door. I felt as though he was looking at me. There was just this silence for the longest time, until he finally spoke, saying, "I know you're in there. I'm sure your family already called the cops. I'm not sure what my next course of action should be." At that moment, I had to decide whether to stay in there or make a break for the door, and I chose the second option. I burst through the closet door screaming as some kind of adrenaline boost. I made it to the door, expecting him to lunge for me and grab me, but he didn't. I ran up to my parents' loft and banged on the door. My dad opened it and let me in. I waited with them until the cops entered through the freshly broken back door. Then we left the room to meet them. The man who was sitting on my bed was no longer in the house. We checked every closet, under every bed, every little crevice of the house. The cops recommended we tape a bunch of garbage bags over the door and shut the curtain, and also that we stay awake for the night. My dad stayed in the living room the whole night, and first thing in the morning, he ran to Home Depot to buy a glass pane to fix the door. We're still actively quarantining in this house a week later. I'll send updates if the man returns. I've been staying in my apartment in Jersey City during this coronavirus epidemic. My roommate has since gone home to Ohio to stay with her family during all of this, so I've been in the apartment alone. I've been mostly just watching new movies and shows. I try not to go out too much because my city is pretty bad right now. A couple days ago, I was running extremely low on food, so I had to make a mandatory grocery run. I went to the nearby Trader Joe's wearing a mask and gloves, which, including the insane line and limited stock, turned out to be a production. On my walk home in the dark, I realized the streets were even quieter than they were the last time I went shopping, just a week before. Suddenly, out from an alleyway, some guy wearing a mask and gloves approached me. He had a baby wrapped in a hoodie and small blanket in his hands. He seemed very sincere in asking me to let him take his son to my apartment real quick so he could change his diaper and feed him his food. He swore to me that he was clean, and that he really needed this favor for just 5 minutes, that it was an emergency. Hearing the baby's little cries, and the fact that this man even had a child with him and just seemed sincere, the soft part of me agreed. I led him to my apartment building. It was only a short walk from there. We walked up the 3 stories to my apartment, and I let him inside, asking him to close the door behind him. I cleared a spot on the living room table for him to change his child's diaper and whatever. When I turned around, the man was like pacing around, or more like snooping around, I guess. He went into my kitchen to do God knows what. I called over to him that I set up the table for him to use. He didn't answer. I started getting confused. I walked to the kitchen and saw him looking around suspiciously, and what else I saw confused me. The man was standing with what I thought was his child, held in only one hand. It took me a second to understand. It wasn't a child. It was just some baby doll wrapped up in a blanket. I'm assuming one of those realistic ones that make the crying and moaning noises. The man looked at me and pulled out a gun from his right pocket. That's where things went from 1 to 100 real quick. He looked at me with a gun aimed at me and said something along the lines of, "I'm gonna take what I want and you're gonna stay in my sight." Of course, I had to say okay with a gun aimed at my head. I wondered if it could be a BB gun with a tip painted black, but even if it was, I doubted I could overpower him. I couldn't risk it. The man pulled out a big black bag from his backpack and filled it with valuables, including my wallet, some of my roommate's jewelry, kitchen valuables, my brother's Xbox which he lent me, and my iPad. It was sickening to watch, but I was the most scared of him pulling the trigger of that gun. He filled his bag and threw the fake baby in it as well, then he left. I called the cops first thing. They came and helped me in contacting the building owner to see the CCTV footage from the halls. Of course, upon seeing the footage, it didn't help much. The man's face was covered by a mask, making it near impossible to even discover who he was. All I can do is urge everyone to be careful, not to trust anyone, and stay indoors until...
I was hanging out with my friend Dustin, and we decided to go explore this creepy old abandoned asylum. It was a huge building, about 3 stories high. We walked past the railroad. We then continued to the old asylum. As we walked to it, I looked up and my heart dropped. From the 3rd story window, I could see someone looking down at me and Justin. I stopped and he asked me what was wrong. I told him to look up in that window on the right. He looked up and saw it too. We continued to stare at it for about a few seconds before whoever or whatever it was moved out of sight. We then were deciding if we should still go in. We settled it. It was just some person trying to buy drugs or something. Drug deals and teens were always in there sneaking. We went past no trespassing signs and explored the first level of the building. There was a lot of broken glass and graffiti everywhere. There was this one that said, "I love it when they run." Don't get me wrong, that was kind of creepy, but obviously done as a joke. So we made it up to the second floor, and basically the same thing there, except for an old elevator shaft that was cracked slightly open. Dustin turned his flashlight on and put it in the elevator. We saw a whole lot of electrical junk, some dead birds and animals. If that wasn't freaky enough, we also heard something walking above us on the third story. My heart felt like it was about to explode. I had a bad feeling about this, and I told him we should leave. He said, "Nah, it'll be fine," and he started walking up to the third story. I didn't want to be left alone near the spooky elevator, so I followed behind him. We had our phones out, taking pictures of all kinds of stuff on the previous floors. As we walked up the stairs, I swear we were being followed, and I told Dustin to hurry up. He went upstairs, and I wasn't far behind. What I saw on the third floor of that asylum will haunt me for the rest of my life. There were pentagrams and animals all over the place. It smelled awful up there. There were some rooms in the back of the corner. Keep in mind, this is the floor we saw that thing looking down at us from. We heard what sounded like whispers coming from the middle room. We got our phones out and started taking pictures of it. After I got about 2 or 3 pics, I saw a figure step out of the room. My heart was beating so hard I swear it had come through my chest. It was the same person that was looking from the window. Me and Dustin were freaking out, but we didn't dare move. About 10 seconds of staring, and it started sprinting at us screaming. I took off in a sprint down the stairs, almost dropping my phone. I ran and jumped out of the 2-story window and landed in some brush. I got up and ran some more before crouching behind some old shed. Then it hit me. Dustin was still in there. I hadn't even noticed him when I ran down the stairs. I texted him and asked him where he was, but didn't reply. I sat crouched behind that shed for about 3 minutes before I saw Justin sprinting out of that house. I jumped from behind the shed and called his name. He saw me and screamed, "Run." He looked behind him. Then I looked behind him. He was being chased by 2 people. I took off down the road, heading for the railroad. Dustin caught up with me, and we didn't stop until we made it to the tracks. We jumped in a ditch beside the railroad and looked up to see the 2 people standing at the door of the asylum. They were watching us, but then turned and walked back inside. We ran up to the local burger place and sat down at a booth. Out of breath, we ordered some Sprite and fries. While waiting for food, I asked him what happened after I ran. He said the guy chased him, and he ran down the stairs and saw me jump out of the window, and he ran to the elevator, where he found a small space behind some boxes to hide behind. He said after he sat there for a bit, the guy came down the stairs with another person. They were watching to see where we went. Then his phone went off because I texted him. He said they looked his direction and saw him. They then chased him down the stairs and out the door. And that's when I saw him and we ran. We didn't call the cops because we didn't want to get in trouble for trespassing. I don't know.
Mortis Media.
Good evening all, and welcome. A closet is a strange space where you store many of your worldly possessions, but not a place you're in very often. However, it doesn't mean that others can't get comfortable inside it. Creepers may enter your home and hide within them, or perhaps something of a more paranormal nature. It's time for you to find out. So get comfortable, lock those closets, and let the darkness take control. When I was almost 12, the woman living above me was a coke dealer. The night of my 12th birthday, she went missing. Not long after, her boyfriend came down to ask if he could use our phone. This was 2004, so having a cell phone was more of an exception to the rule, at least in my area. For a little context, I was home alone a lot of the time, while my mum was at work about a 5-minute walk away. My mum had let our neighbour and her boyfriend come in to use our phone several other times before, so I assumed nothing was wrong with it and let him in, bringing him into the living room, which is towards the front of our apartment, to use the phone in there. He picks up the receiver, dials a number, waits a few seconds, then hangs up the phone. He does this a few more times before the front door of the building opens. You can easily hear the front door open from where we are, as it's a heavy door and the walls are very thin. It's just the way our apartment is set up. Me and my mum's apartment was the only one on the first floor, and our upstairs neighbour's apartment was the only one above us. My neighbour's boyfriend looked at me, put his finger to his lips like he was trying to shush me, and told me not to tell anyone he was there before speed walking to my room at the other end of the apartment. I watched my bedroom door close right before there was a loud, hard, cop-like knock on the door. My jaw dropped as I opened the door to see a cop. He asked if my neighbour's boyfriend was there, and being scared, I stammered out, "Yeah, he just went into my room." The officer asked if he could come in, to which I agreed, and as he was coming in, he asked if I could get his partner in the back door and lead them to my room. We walked together to the back of the apartment and I let in his partner. The back door to the apartment was right next to my bedroom door, but we had to walk around the kitchen table to get there. There was just barely enough space between the two doors to fit a narrow rectangular table against it without blocking the path to either door. After I let them into my room, I watched as they pulled my neighbour's boyfriend out of my bedroom closet, as they brought him out of my room and towards the back door, which led to an enclosed fire escape. They told me to go wait in the living room while they brought him out the back door. I walked back to the living room, and after they closed the door, I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could hear the distinct sound of metal clinking and quickly realized that he had just been handcuffed. Still scared, I waited for the police car to drive away before grabbing my keys, making sure the back door was locked, and locking the front door on my way out before running to my mum's work crying. I'm pretty sure I cut the 5-minute trip to about 2, and I've never been a faster runner. I was fueled entirely on adrenaline and fear at that point. I just wanted my mum. When I told her what happened, my mum was pissed that he had used me the way he had, hiding out in a child's bedroom closet, of all the places to try and keep the cops from finding him. She gave me a short but gentle lecture that night about not letting people in to use the phone, telling me that I was not to let people use our phone even if I knew them unless she was home. I didn't know what exactly he wanted from us, nor do I know what would have happened if the cops hadn't have shown up. I don't know if he had known that the cops were on their way and he had come to my apartment specifically to hide from them, or if he was up to something else and knew it was the cops when the front door building opened. Our upstairs neighbor's boyfriend, let's never meet again. This happened